You've heard a lot about electric vehicles. Here's a twist you probably didn't see coming. Georgia, right here in the South, is leading the country in EV manufacturing investment. From the factory floor to your driveway, we'll connect the dots between innovation, industry, and everyday life. Let's get into it. The EV and mobility industries are evolving at lightning speed, driven by the accelerating convergence of electrification, artificial intelligence, and autonomy. As vehicles become smarter and more connected, the industry's center of gravity is shifting beyond batteries and drivetrains towards software, autonomy, and integrated AI systems. Nowhere is this shift more palpable than in the southeastern US, America's battery belt, where states like Georgia are rapidly positioning themselves as global hubs for next generation e mobility innovation. Welcome to episode 2 of the Battery Belt Podcast, a series from the Georgia Network for Electric Mobility, or GNEM, where we explore the future of transportation, technology, and policy from the perspective of the Southeast's emerging EV powerhouse. GNEM is a public private partnership network anchored at the University of Georgia, focused on shaping the battery belt's leadership in electric mobility. Today's guest is Alex Poirot, Head of External Affairs at Beep Inc., and a proud UGA graduate who previously served in senior policy roles in the US Congress and the US Department of Transportation. Beep is pioneering the deployment of autonomous electric shuttles, helping redefine what public transit can look like through real-world deployments across the country. And just last week, Alex was in Jacksonville speaking at the National Autonomous Vehicle Day conference, hosted by AV America, GTA, and Guided. So there's no better time to talk about where this technology is headed. We'll talk with Alex about how AI-powered mobility is reshaping everything from urban infrastructure to federal policy, and what that means for Georgia's electric mobility ecosystem and the broader battery belt. From autonomy to public trust, regulation, and infrastructure, this is a conversation for anyone working at the intersection of technology, policy, and the future of how we move. Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Gabby. That was wonderful.
Alex, let's start with the big picture. Beep is operating across several states in the battery belt, as well as several states nationally. Why does the battery belt matter for autonomous mobility, and how does it intersect with future mobility and economic growth?
That's a great question. The quality of life is great down here, and we're happy to grow the revenue base and enjoy their additional economic impact on our region. We don't so much welcome tens of thousands of new vehicles on our roads. They're already congested as it is. And so Beep, the company that I work for, essentially started with the premise of how do we leverage autonomous vehicle technology, not just to make roads safer, not just to make travel more convenient, but to also tackle some core transportation problems like congestion, like pollution, not just air pollution, but noise pollution too. And so a lot of the use cases that attract a lot of attention in the autonomous vehicle space are replacing a human-driven vehicle with an autonomous vehicle.
There's been a lot of buzz around AVs in general. Where do you see autonomous shuttle deployment realistically heading in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you feel is overhyped versus what is truly scalable today?
That's the question that we have really worked to answer for 6 years, right? We've been waiting for the technology, both on the software and the hardware vehicle side, to catch up to the market demand, right? There's always been a demand for congestion relief, for pollution reduction, for more convenient, connected communities. But we didn't have the self-drive software. We didn't have the mission management remote oversight software, and we haven't had the purpose-built automotive grade vehicles to service that type of scale that you're talking about. And so over the next 5 to 10 years, I think it's going to be an exponential growth in the number of deployments you see on the autonomous side, right? Of course, trucking is doing their thing with logistics. A lot of the ride-hail, robotaxi type services are launching in various markets and trying to scale a bit. But the shuttle side is unique in the sense that we operate within the confines of a public sector deployment. And so what that means is we integrate typically within an existing transportation network, be it an airport or a public transportation network or a municipal fleet. We typically operate in the same way and under the same guidelines and regulations as a traditional legacy mode of transportation, such as a bus or a cutaway. It just so happens that our vehicles are um, driverless. They're able to operate 24/7. Able to accommodate off-peak and on-peak times and flex routes, and they can adapt to changing travel patterns, circumstances. And so when you're thinking about, okay, if you're a municipality and maybe you're the LA Olympics, right? Maybe you're an area that's going to host a Super Bowl or a World Series, right? Atlanta's no stranger to those types of mega events. And you want to be able to scale quickly, but you also want to be able to, in some cases, scale down just as quickly. Well, this provides you the opportunity for that to where you can provide transportation, high capacity transportation very quickly and safely within an existing network. And then you can move those pieces back to where they typically belong and are integrated as part of a local network. To answer your question, within the 5 to 10 year period, I mean, I could see thousands upon thousands of individual shuttles operating in different deployments across the country.
That makes sense. Tell the listeners about some of the deployments that you've done in the Southeast and some of the applications that they were used to make like shuttle connections for.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are headquartered in outside of Orlando, Florida, and we have operated in Tampa, in Jacksonville, in Miami. I mean, we've operated at a zoo, right? You think about if you've ever been to a theme park, amusement park. Have you ever thought about, man, it sure would be nice to have an air conditioned ride to get around? Well, we've serviced that use case. If you think about an urban environment like Jacksonville, where how do we connect these disparate neighborhoods that have historically been underserved by public transportation for one reason or another? Well, we can now connect those. We even had during COVID, when public transportation and shared mobility was really at a historic low, there weren't a lot of folks excited to hop on a shared use shuttle. And so we repurposed those vehicles to carry COVID samples, test specimens, and first responders and nursing staff and doctors and whatnot to and from the testing sites to the clinic to the hospital and around that campus. So that just kind of speaks to the unique flexibility these vehicles have to service different use cases in different environments. But we've operated on university campuses, right? At Mississippi State University, we've operated at UNC Charlotte in the Carolinas, and the university is another great use case, right? I mean, in Athens, we've got quite a good public transportation system. I rode the bus a lot every day, just about when I was in school. But there are natural and inherent limitations to service. You can't go everywhere. It stops at some point. It has to stop at some point. So what we like to do is provide that extension of the existing service to where maybe it stops at the end of downtown and you got off-campus housing a couple of miles further out. Well, we can connect to that service and bring you back into the trunk line service to where the fixed costs aren't nearly as high, the operational costs are much lower, and the reliability and flexibility of the service to service different use cases is higher than any other mode. So universities are a great use case, something that we've got experience with and are absolutely looking at as a key piece of the expansion of scale AV services.
So, in terms of the states in the Southeast that you've done deployments in, there's MSU in Mississippi. There are like a few in Jacksonville in Florida. I think you also did some in North Carolina as well, right?
We did. We were in Charlotte as part of a project with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. We debuted a shuttle at the UNC Charlotte campus, and then we moved to Bond Park to service a municipal park area. And another really important piece of this is the workforce development side. So we also launched the first, I think it's the first student and faculty service at a college called the Florida State College of Jacksonville. And in tandem with the launch of that service, we worked with them to develop what I believe to be the first accredited AV curriculum. And so we weren't just testing the viability of these types of services in that campus environment. We were also developing actively a curriculum to help train and prepare students at the university to familiarize themselves with the vehicles, the systems, and potentially pursue a career in autonomous transportation in the future.
That's very exciting. We love to see some workforce development, a very important part of the e-mobility, future mobility equation. I guess the other deployment I think we have to highlight because we're in Georgia is I'd love to hear more about the upcoming deployment for the World Cup next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited about that. And I don't want to age myself too badly, but I'll just suffice it to say I was in DC and met with the some of the founding staff of the Beltline when they approached us and said, "Hey, here's what we're thinking about doing. Here's our vision." And that was 10 or 12 years ago. And to think now how far they've come in developing what has become a blueprint for urban connectivity is really remarkable. So I am personally really excited about launching that service next year. Really excited about partnering with the Beltline and being able to test that use case out because there's a lot of debate about how you connect the Beltline. But one item that hasn't gotten as much attention, but I think is important as well, is how do you connect other people to the Beltline, not just around the Beltline, because there's that need and that want for connectivity to that area, whether it's the recreational parts, the jobs, et cetera, the entertainment, it's going to continue to grow. And so the more connections we can build to the Beltline, the better. And one of those will be represented by our pilot project, which connects the Weston MARTA station to the Atlanta University Center down to the Lee and White mixed use development. Beltline is testing different types of modes to service their needs, and this is one of those options that they're looking at. And so we're excited to be a part of it.
I'm particularly really excited about it because that's actually one of the use cases for the autonomous shuttles I'm most excited about is connecting parts of cities that need a really good, flexible connecting solution. And it's very expensive or very difficult to do it in other ways. And autonomous shuttle slash autonomous vehicles create like a cheaper, lower barrier to entry way to create those connections. I guess the last question along this vein of talking about the Southeast is there anything in particular that has made the Southeast a compelling test bed? Because I know that you guys have done some other deployments, like in national parks, as well as one in Hawaii's airport, I believe, as well. But is there anything about the Southeast in particular that has made it engaging test bed for Beep?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say two factors. One is the need, going back to congestion, relieving congestion, making sure new modes of transportation are safe. And number two is the regulatory environment, frankly, that encourages innovation. So whether it's what the Georgia Department of Transportation is doing to improve safety and innovation on roadways, what the ATL is doing, what Beltline is looking at, I think the regulatory environment is conducive to trying new and different things to make life better. You hope that every jurisdiction thinks that way. Not all of them do, but the battery belt, and in particular Georgia and Florida in that area, have really, I think, opened the door to welcome new and evolving technologies in and demonstrate the value of those technologies. And it's really smart because with any nascent industry, you need time to test viability, to test use cases, to continue to develop and improve the applications, because there's going to come a time where, hey, we're ready for prime time. We're ready to scale. And if you don't have that familiarity and experience with these types of services and modes, you're going to be behind the curve, so to speak. And so Georgia and Florida and the battery belt they're going to be right on the cutting edge of these services once they become, enter revenue service and become permanent integrated parts of the transportation network.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. On the same vein of really the policy aspect of the jurisdictions, would love to talk about how we've had a lot of recent federal policies that are actually very supportive of autonomous vehicles come up recently. So, in general, would love your take, especially with your background, on how well you think federal and state policies are keeping up with the development or the ramp up of autonomous vehicles and future mobility, and if there are any other policy changes that you would love to see that would make even a bigger outsized impact or difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in government, typically the first order of business is do no harm. Government is not incentivized to take risks generally, and typically for good reason. But there are risk-based approaches that take into account the different aspects of a certain evolving and emerging technology that you can use to advance those services. So the first job or the first, I guess, need is to prioritize innovation. We want to do this. So let's start there with the outcome we want to achieve and work backwards to figure out how to do it efficiently and safely. And so I've been really encouraged with the Department of Transportation under Secretary Duffy about the prioritization of safe innovation. They just released last week or the week before some new information to the industry that said we're going to focus on a couple of key areas that we feel we can make a difference in today. That's the vehicle approval process and the vehicle deployment process, which is governed, of course, by the Department of Transportation. One of the things that they said was current regulations require you, if you're going to import an AV that doesn't comply with the federal motor vehicle safety standards, it has to be an import. It has to be from a foreign country. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? So they changed that and said you can use American manufactured vehicles through that same process. The other piece that's, I think, going to be even more important is the commitment to reduce the time frame for vehicle design approvals from years to a matter of months. And that's going to be huge because we've been engaged in what's known as the Part 555 process for over 2 years now. And taking a step back, our whole regulatory regime is certainly not designed to accommodate these types of services. It's a bit like trying to fit a square peg through a round hole. You got to kind of sharpen the edges and twist it around a little bit. Um, but it is a process that's available to them. And one thing that they have identified as a more tactical approach to approving these types of services and vehicles is let's not try to think that we have to have every answer to every question as we go. Let's work with manufacturers to build out a series of terms and conditions that ensure safety, ensure roadway passenger and roadway safety, but also allows manufacturers the incentive to come over and build stuff here. So I'll just give you one example. We approached multiple vehicle manufacturers who expressed interest in coming to the United States and building manufacturing capacity here. There were two big companies. I won't name all the names. There were two big companies that have, been tier one automotive manufacturers for more than a century, headquartered in Europe. And so when we were having those discussions, the first question they ask is, okay, how do we get our vehicles on the road? And the answer was, well, you've got to, design your vehicle and then you've got to apply through the DOT for authorization. You said, well, how long does that take? Well, there's no time limit. Well, when will we find out if we can operate our vehicle? There's no way to know, right? That's a tough pitch to bring companies over to the US to manufacture, to move their supply chains, to build new supply chains, to find new suppliers. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. And if you can't create that path to commercialization through the regulatory process, guess what? They're going to build their supply chains and manufacturing bases in Europe and Asia, and we're going to be left importing vehicles for the next decade or longer. So I think it's really important that we understand what companies need in order to build in the US. And really, it boils down to certainty. Give us a path. We'll do what you need to do, but we just need to know there's a path to get to market. And that's what's been lacking in the country. And I think that's what the DOT has an opportunity to carve out and clarify.
The one example that you'd given me previously on this that I thought was funny was that one of the discussions that you had to have with them was justifying why you didn't need windshield wipers for some of the shuttles is because you're like, no one is driving them, so they don't need to have the same windshield wiper that everybody else has. Just wanted to put that in for folks who are listening to this later, so it's grounded and they're like, oh, this is some of what they're trying to get around with the design specifications and rules of just an industry that is rapidly changing, and some of the rules then become outdated.
Yeah, absolutely. And the federal motor vehicle safety standards are wonderful, and they've been incredibly effective in building safe vehicles for human drivers. They assume that there's a human driver in every vehicle. And so part of what they've had to contend with is how do we take a new, fresh look at those safety standards, assuming that there's not a human being driving that vehicle in the driver's seat, right? How do we make sure that you can demonstrate an equivalent level of safety through technology, right? To your point about the windshield wipers, you may not need a big, huge windshield wiper on the front windshield. You may need little wipers for your sensors, lidars, radars, etc. And so it's those things that seem like, okay, that's pretty common sense that we can get through, that end up being a lot more complex than you might imagine.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. We should talk about safety, right? Because I think a big barrier for the autonomous vehicles adoption is just kind of public perception of safety as well. Um, what kinds of standards or benchmarks currently exist in the industry for safety, and how does Beep think about like safe operation and building community confidence in safety?
Yeah, I mean, that's mission one. That's something that we have always baked into every deployment on the front end through obviously community engagement with the potential ridership in the service area to familiarize folks with how to interact with the service, how to use it, what to do if you need help, those sorts of things, but also with the first responder community, because you never want law enforcement or first responders or EMTs to have their first experience or interaction with an autonomous vehicle during an emergent situation. You want them well trained and familiar with, how do I find this vehicle's registration? How do I get people in and out of this vehicle? How do I move it off the road? You want to have all those conversations and trainings ahead of launch. And so, not everybody, it seems pretty obvious. Not everybody chose that path, but we have made that an integral part of every deployment we've had, is to make sure that we have not just training and familiarity, but buy-in from the first responders, the regulators, the municipalities we've operated in. We don't just put our vehicles and our services in a city. We work through and with the city or the municipality or the agency to implement these services. So that in and of itself is a bit of a different approach than a lot of different AV companies have taken.
That's great. This is slightly shifting gears a little bit. But the other big question that people have beyond safety itself is also just how you think about EV infrastructure and autonomous vehicle deployment. People usually discuss those things as separate. But a lot of the conversations I've had to have with folks is that EV infrastructure and EV mobility is very related to autonomous mobility because it's ADAS stacks and software stacks on oftentimes electric vehicles. Do you think about Beep's work intersecting with electric vehicle rollout at all, especially since a lot of the regions you're working with are still early in their mobility transition? Or do you see those adoption paths as different problems to kind of tackle?
I think they're they're certainly interrelated because most AVs are EVs. I don't know of many manufacturers or companies that are pursuing an internal combustion autonomous vehicle. There are some that are retrofit with an ADS kit. I haven't seen any. I'm sure there's some out there, but by and large, all the AVs are EVs, and so you kind of have to have that conversation together of how do we make sure there's charging capacity, how to make sure it's strategically placed to where it maximizes the public use. It makes sure that you've got vehicles for a fleet charge when you need them charged, and you've got to figure out a way to do it safely and cost effectively. So I think the challenges are certainly interrelated, and solving for one is going to help the other.
I agree. I was just interested to see what you thought as well. And it's also a common question that comes up. The other question is about the broader autonomous vehicle ecosystem. There are a lot of players kind of launching in the Southeast right now. Because Waymo made an announcement this week, and there are like a lot of announcements going on with the broader autonomous vehicle players coming into the market. How do you see the broader autonomous vehicle ecosystem shaping up in the future? Like, what are some of the challenges, or as well as if you want to talk about how Beep's model differs in approaches from some of the broader ecosystem as well?
Yeah, I'll start with that second question and work backwards. Beep as a company is really a software company. We view ourselves as an enabler of multiple autonomous mobility systems. We don't manufacture a vehicle. We don't develop the driver software. We actually serve as that enabling layer that connects the various different types of autonomous driving software you may have in your community, the different types of vehicles, different form factors you may have, and connects those safely and effectively and efficiently within an existing network that's made up of all different types of vehicles and systems. Um, and so, to that extent, we don't really view ourselves as direct competitors to a lot of the other AV folks. I mean, I've got friends that work for all kinds of different AV companies that have been attracted to this industry for the same reason I have. And we've got a number of channel partners that folks may assume might would be competitors, but no, we're actually each fulfilling a different piece of this ecosystem that's critical to building the full picture. It's a little unique in that there's not a lot of folks doing that, but as you see more and more cities testing different platforms, they don't want to be tied to one vehicle or one ADS system. They want options, and so we view ourselves as an enabler of that vehicle agnostic, software agnostic platform to where you can safely integrate all those services across different platforms in one community through a single pane of glass.
Yeah, that's really helpful, especially just for people to have a better understanding of what the broader autonomous vehicle ecosystem kind of looks like and where different companies can sit in that. I have two more questions for you. One of which is, if you could wave a magic wand and solve one key barrier to scaling autonomous vehicles right now in the US, what would that be?
It would be the vehicle approval process because there's such an opportunity with a lot of great historic OEMs that are looking into this particular piece of the industry, the automotive industry. There's such an opportunity to secure a lot of that manufacturing domestically, which not only has workforce implications, but it also frankly has national security implications. Um, you know, the US wants to be an exporter of this advanced manufacturing technology. We don't want to be an importer. And so there is a window of time we'll have to actually secure our place in that sort of hierarchy of who does what globally in this industry. That window is probably the next 3 to 5 years. Um, and again, going back to the DOT, really encouraged by what they've put out so far and what they've committed to doing in this way. I think that's the single most important thing we can do as a country for this industry right now is create and carve that clear path to commercialization. Here's how you can build a vehicle in the US. We'll give you a time frame for a decision, We'll give you remedies for any deficiencies we find quickly, and we'll let you start building, start hiring, and start deploying these services at scale. It's the single biggest roadblock is uncertainty. There is no clear path to do it today. It's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. And that just does not bode well for capital investment, especially in a field that's as volatile and emergent as autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, and especially in an industry that's already tends to be kind of thin margin as well for automotive in general, it's really, really hard for them to make decisions. Like recently, Ford came out with an announcement saying that they were dropping their second half projections for this year because they felt like it was too volatile to make the usual projections that they do, which is just a wild statement. I don't know if that's ever happened in Ford's history. But yeah, it's really, really hard to I'm sure invest in autonomous vehicles domestically without having like really, really clear runway for it. My last question is this is more of a public perception piece. Is there anything you wish people understood better about the future of mobility? And is there anything you didn't get to talk about that you'd love to kind of give a soapbox final statement on autonomous mobility and Beep as well?
Thank you, Gabby. I just remembered I completely failed to answer one of your questions, and that was what's overhyped? I think what is overhyped in this field is the level 5 capability. So, as many of you listeners probably know, there's the SAE levels of autonomy, and level 5 is that totally humanless, wind it up, let it go. There is no oversight, it just runs. I think it's overhyped for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think it's possible to even get to that point in the near future. And two, I don't think we need to get to that. It'll be so much safer. Congestion is going to be so reduced, and convenience is going to be so improved by level 4 applications that it shouldn't really be a priority to jump to level 5. Let's get level 4 done and done well, and we'll see how it works, and we can go from there. But I think that idea that we want to get to level 5 is a mistaken priority. I think level 4 is going to do a world of good for all kinds of parts of the transportation industry. And the other question, what would I like people to know about it? I would suggest if you haven't ridden in an autonomous vehicle, I'd encourage you to do it. We operated a couple of pilots that were related to Veterans Affairs hospitals. And actually, we launched one in California, in Palo Alto, and I went out to visit it, meet with the team, and bring some folks to come ride the system. And so we got out there to ride the system, and I had to wait 2 or 3 loops because there were so many veterans at the hospital using it that the shuttle was full. And I was like, I don't want to take your ride. Please, I'll wait until it's empty and there's room for me. But they loved it. And so one of the more encouraging aspects of the 2+ years I've been at Beep is seeing the viability of this use case really pay off. We did before and after verbatim surveys with riders and people that would ride the different systems in Charlotte, down in Florida, and various places. In Cobb County, in Cumberland, by the Brave Stadium. And what we found was there was about I don't have the polling in front of me, but there was roughly a 20 to 30% group of people that said, I feel safe riding autonomous vehicle. And then you get to 30-40% said, I'd like to see more. By the end of a 3/4 mile loop, that number shot up to 80 to 90%. And the biggest complaint we've had at a lot of our different deployments has been, why aren't there more vehicles and why don't they go more places? And so that's a problem that we welcome and we like to have, and we're going to work to solve over the next 2-3 years as we scale up.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me for episode 2 of the Battery Belt, and we'll see you for the next one. Let's stay plugged in.
And go dogs.